Hi everyone, and welcome to this talk about code citations, what I think is a very new and exciting tool for Vault. This is part of the graph analysis plugin for Obsidian, and Skeptic Mystic already did a video on this plugin before. In this video, we'll be covering specifically the code citations algorithm. In this talk, I will first really talk about why we've developed this algorithm and why we think it's useful, and give some examples as to why we think you might also find it useful. For this, we'll give an example using a news snippet, which I think can be used in different kinds of contexts as well, and in different kinds of purposes. Then we will see how existing solutions, existing methods would deal with this problem, and what their problems are, and see why code citations can help you solve these problems. We'll go into some examples of how code citations will solve these problems, and then give a nice little demo to see how you can use it in practice. The main problem that we try to solve is how and where to add facts to your Obsidian Vault. What is a fact here? Well, a fact can be many things. It can be something that happened in your life. It can be some piece of news. It can be a description of a system, a piece of knowledge, something that happened in a story that you're writing, in a novel, or something in your tabletop RPG where one person, I don't know, decanted another warrior. I don't really go much into these spaces. But there are many events that can be thought of, and they might involve many different things like dates or people or places or organizations or subjects. And now think for a moment, the main question here is, where do you add a fact? Where do you add this piece of information? And to discuss this question properly, let's choose an example. It will be a pretty dull news article, because that's what I do in my Obsidian Vault. I collect news articles, and I summarize them and add these snippets of information to my vault. So in this piece of information, we describe an event that happened not too long ago. On the 30th of October, the G20 has approved a global tax, which is kind of tax that's going to be all around the world. And it will tax all businesses wherever it is with 50%. And then a nice bit of information about this was that it was proposed early 2021 by Joe Biden, and that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has asked the EU, the European Union, to follow this example and to also strive for this global tax. And so again, the main question that we want to answer is, where do we put this two-sentence snippet? In what node do we put it? To think about this probably a little bit more, let's model this piece of information as a graph. So this might look complex. It's really just a simple abstraction of what the sentences say. So the topic of this piece of information is a global tax. And we see here that Joe Biden and Macron both really want this measure. So, we add a link here to this knowledge graph that say that Biden and Macron both want the global tax. Another nice bit of information was that the G20 approved the global tax on the 30th of October. And Macron also asked Joe Biden to follow the example of wanting this global tax. So there are all kinds of bits of information that can be modeled by this graph. And obviously making this graph is complicated and hard, and not something we really like to do, right? So one thing that we really need to ask is, why do we want to store this piece of information? There can be many different reasons why you want to find this piece of information back. For example, if you want to know about the news of 30th of October, of course you want to find this thing back because this happened on the 30th of October. But there are many more, I think, interesting questions that can be asked about this information, and where you really want to find back this particular piece of information from your vault. One of those is, why do I care about all of these entities that we link to in our Obsidian vault? So why do we care about Biden? Why do we care about Macron? Why do we care about global tax, the G20, EU? So we have linked to all of these, and that means that they will appear either as an unresolved or a resolved node within our Obsidian vault. And that means that we have written about them before. But if we have written about them before, we of course would like to know why did we write about them, why did we wrote about them before? So maybe this has been a year ago, maybe it has been 5 years ago. And you would quickly like to remember, oh right, that's why I wrote about Biden before, or about Macron, or about the global tax. That's why I have the global tax already in my vault. Another question that is very interesting, I think, is, and it actually comes up a lot when you want to go back into your memory and ask questions, is what is the relation between, for example, Biden and Macron? What does Macron think of Biden? This can be a question in many, many different contexts. For example, in your tabletop RPG, you might ask, what does one character think of another? Or when has a person last visited a place? So basically, the question here in a more abstract general setting is, what is the relation between two concepts? Answering this question, I think, one of the primary questions that you ask when you are thinking, you want to get back your memory. What is the relation between two concepts? And answering that question is actually, it sounds like it's really easy with Obsidian, but in my opinion, it's not always that easy. So we will figure out later why that is. A similar question in this vein is, what do Biden or Macron think about the global tax? That's of course a question that would be very interesting in this context. So again, the main question that we want to answer is, where do we put this information so that we can answer all these questions? It turns out that this is pretty hard. So one obvious choice would be to put this piece of information inside your daily notes. It's really nice to put them in daily notes because, well, it's the news of that date, right? So that makes a lot of sense. And I think the main benefit of adding it in daily notes is that you never have to think about, where do I put this information? If I read something on that day, or I have some news or screenshots from that day, I just add it to that daily note. It's quick and easy, and there is not that too much thinking overhead there. But it turns out that that is not so helpful on all occasions, because what can we actually answer of our questions when we add it to the daily notes and we just try to use backlinks in our graph, the main thinking tools of Obsidian, to answer this question? Well, one I think way to think about this is, what is actually the graph doing when we add this piece of information to our daily note? So this is like an abstraction of the Obsidian graph, but if we add it to the daily note, that means that this piece of information is in here, and that means that we have links from the daily note to all of these different concepts, right? So you can of course go to EU and find the backlink to this node to find it back, but there are no links between these concepts. So if you would go to global tax and you want to know the link between Macron or Biden, then there is no link there. It's only through this node that we have this link. So answering the question, what is the news of the 30th of October, is really easy. We just navigate to this node and we can easily see this. We can easily find this back. The question, why do I care about all the different concepts in the snippet, can be answered, but I'll argue that it is actually not so easy to answer them in a bit. And then the two questions that are really about the relation between two concepts, they are pretty hard to answer, because we might be at the global text node, and we might want to know, okay, what's the relation between Biden? But then we would have to go through this node, and we have to go through all the backlinks of global text to find out where it has cited Joe Biden to get a bit of a relation between that. And that is a lot of overhead to really figure out, if you have everything in this one place, how to how to figure out these relations. And okay, so you might argue, okay, maybe we put this piece of information inside the Joe Biden node, then there is a direct relation. I mean, that's true, but then still, that would just change the source of all these links to a different node, and then there would still be no relation between global text and Macron. Then I would have to go through Joe Biden. And similarly, you might argue, okay, maybe you add a new node for this particular piece of information, like a node that represents an article, but it just shifts the problem to a different node. Everything comes out of a single node, and there are no links between the other nodes in your graph. Even though, as we modeled it, it would actually have been there. And I think I prefer to put it in a daily node because it has the least mental overhead for me. Now let's particularly consider this second question. Why do I care about, for example, Biden? And why do I not think that this is easy to answer? And so here is why. If you put everything into a daily node, this is what your backlinks panel is going to look like. It's going to look like a gigantic list of dates. And now if you ask me, that is really hard to understand because like a daily node doesn't say that much, right? So you would have to expand all of these to figure out, oh right, there was a story about this, and then you go to the next one, oh, there was a story, but it is really hard to filter through that, especially if like Joe Biden is of course a common entity in my vault. I have 36 mentions of Joe Biden. And we need to go through all of these to find back what I wrote about him. So I think this can be done a lot more efficiently. If you use a method where you add everything to a article, this will be a little bit less of a problem, but also that's a lot more overhead to add all these article nodes. One alternative that you can think of, I will argue is not a good idea, is to use, for example, data view inline links to model this graph over here. Then you can use Juggle or Breadcrumbs or something else that's really fancy to interpret this graph, right? You can technically do this. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of overhead, and I don't think you should do it. And why do I not think so? For this, I always refer to this very nice figure from a PhD thesis about personal knowledge management. It is really about how do you manage your data, your personal knowledge, in the context of personal knowledge management, right? And the thesis compares it to organizational knowledge management. So for a much larger public, when you write for a lot more people than just yourself. If you write for yourself, you should really try to focus on efficiency. Because there's really no reason to put all this structure in your vault if you already know what it's going to mean. There is not that much ambiguity because to you it is not ambiguous. To the general public, it will be a lot more ambiguous than to you because you already know all the context, all the prior knowledge. That means that, in conclusion, if you want to do it efficiently, for personal knowledge management, you should write undetailed, rough, and short, and try to keep it the structure to a minimum. While if you write to a larger public and make a knowledge management system for that, it should be a lot more detailed, a lot more exact, understandable, and structured, especially structured. And so I think that it is much better to just assume this structure where you just put it in a simple place like a daily node, and that's it. And then just link from there. But then how do we answer these questions, right? And the answer to that is, I think, to create an algorithm to efficiently answer these questions. And for that, we get to co-citations, finally. Having introduced the problem, hopefully it's clear to you. Let's figure out what the solution is. The solution is actually not that hard. The idea here is that a co-citation is whenever you have a node, in this case C, that cites both A and B. So you can see this is like a graph as well. This node cites, or in Obsidian term, links to both the node A and B. And because C links to both A and B, they are so-called co-cited in the node C. So all that co-citation means is that there is some other node that cites both A and B, that cites both nodes together. So why is it useful? For that, let's go to an example. Let's first answer the question, what does Biden think about the global tax? For this, we can navigate to the global tax node and see what the co-citation panel looks like. As you can see here, it will show a list of the different entities mentioned, or the different nodes mentioned in this piece of information. And particularly, if we expand the Joe Biden node, we will see this snippet. And why is this? Because they were co-cited, because this sentence contains both global tax and Joe Biden. That's how easy it is. We just go to the co-citations panel, the global tax node, of the node you want to research, and see, for example, for the global tax node, what is the relation with Joe Biden. You expand that and see all the snippets where they are cited together. And conceptually, how can we think about this, right? I like to think about it as a second order backlinks panel. So even though this is where the information is stored in the 30th of October node, in the co-citations panel, global tax is linked to all these different nodes, to EU, Joe Biden, G20, Macron, and that is why we can answer these questions. And that is using, why I call it a second order backlinks, using the fact that the 30th of October contains this information. Now, let's look at some other questions that we can answer. They are all kind of similar, actually. So the relation between Biden and Macron is really easy to answer as well. We just go to the Macron node, or to the Biden node if you prefer, and look up where Joe Biden is in the list. We expand it, and we again find back this snippet right from there. As you can see, there are also other entities here that just happened to be in my vault for Macron because I've written about him before. And that means that if you would look at the backlinks panel, there would be a lot more to filter through to find this particular snippet back. But because we know Joe Biden was involved, we can just immediately navigate to Joe Biden and continue on from there. Now, we talked about before about why if you use a backlinks panel, it can sometimes be really hard or take a lot of time to figure out why I cared or why I wrote about a certain node or entity or person or whatever before. Why does co-citation solve this? If you go to the co-citations panel for Biden, you will see there's a lot more going on there. Since Biden is really something I wrote about quite a couple of times before, because he appears in a lot of news articles, you will see there are a lot of different entities already in just this small screenshot that involve him. But instead of looking at a list of daily nodes where Joe Biden happened to be mentioned in, now we actually see people and organizations and news companies and tags and topics that are also involved with Biden. Now we can just say, okay, well, I want to know more about the relation between Biden and Obama. And we just expand this and see whatever is in there. Or similarly with, we see that actually it is sorted in terms of relevancy. We see that Biden is involved a lot with Trump and see that there are a lot of things that I wrote about that involve both Biden and Trump. So we can expand this and see in what kind of context this was. In fact, we can do this really easily. If we expand this, so we click on this expand icon, we can see all the places where Trump and Biden are mentioned together in a single list. And that way we can basically have this workflow where you go to Biden, okay, what did I write about Biden? And we see, oh, but Trump, well, that's interesting, because I've always wanted to know about the relation. I mean, in this case, it's pretty easy to guess, but in other cases, it's maybe less so. So you just expand that, and you see immediately all the different places where you talk about them together. Going a bit more into the technical details of co-citations, you might guess that having a document that contains both links to both entities is not that great, and that's true. So what a lot of the work in co-citations has actually, where the main work has gone into is giving a good score that gives you the strength of a co-citation. Because if you look at this nice example, you can see document 2 and 3, they are over here and here, they are cited over there and there. They should get a high score, right? Because they are cited closely together. So you can be pretty sure that there is a strong connection between these two notes, these two papers. But if there's another document that was only cited over here, so in like 2 paragraphs down, then you can probably guess like, okay, they are probably not as closely connected with each other as 2 and 3 are. So we give the connection between document 1, document 2 a smaller number. So basically that means that we adopted this ID to Obsidian and say, okay, well, how strong is the connection between 2 nodes when they are mentioned somewhere together in the node? And our algorithm that we used, that we have created and developed, takes it into account. So what we do is we first check if 2 entities are together in the same sentence, and then we see that gives the highest score, right? Because they are in the same sentence, it's really likely that they are involved together in something. And then we check, hey, are they in the same paragraph? That's also probably, it's quite likely that they are quite closely related. And then we check, for example, what heading are they? That's another strong indication that it is a similar topic. And then recently we added that you can also use outline hierarchies. So using the outliners to get strong connections between 2 links. And this outline hierarchy is actually really useful because it can be used for like a roam-like or logseq-like querying. We also support showing unresolved links and files and images and tags. And you might wonder how useful is that? Well, as you can see, you can find cats with that. So one thing that I do is that, of course, I take a lot of pictures of my cat. So if I navigate now to the node of my cat, it's called U3. If I navigate to the U3 node, and I go to the co-citations panel, then I can find all the pictures that I added to the daily notes of my cat by just adding a link somewhere to my cat in a daily note, and then adding some pictures of her. And then if I now scroll through the co-citations panel, I can immediately find back all those pictures of my cat. And like, it is really easy. No need to do fancy querying. Just go to that panel and see all the pictures of my cat, and hey, it's amazing. All right, that was it for the more theoretical or like explanation of why we developed this algorithm. Now let's do a couple of small demos just to show you how it works. But this was the main body of the talk, to really get you to understand why we did this and what it is used for. I hope you learned something from it. All right, let's look at some examples from 2 vaults of mine and 1 vault of the guy that Skeptic Mystic also demoed on. So here's my Joe Biden node. Note, I write this vault in Dutch, as you can see. Now let's look at the code citation panel over here. So what I showed in the presentation was not a lie. This is just literally what I have in my own vault. So if we expand Donald Trump, you can see a huge list of places where Trump and Biden are cited together. One thing that might be interesting to note is these numbers, right? So it says here 1, 1, 1. 1 basically means that they are cited in the same sentence. So all of these are places where Trump and Biden are together in the same sentence. Now, if you look at 0.85, which is a lower score, that basically means that there is a sentence next to the other sentence where Joe Biden is, where Donald Trump is mentioned. So here, Joe Biden is mentioned in a sentence, like Joe Biden says we're going to win. Then the next sentence says, with a good answer of Donald Trump. Like, probably not because it's Trump, but that means that there is a sentence, two sentences next to each other that mention these two concepts. And so that means that every number of these basically it's like a hierarchy of how strong the connection is. So 0.7 means that there are two sentences in between. 0.5 means that there are even more sentences in between. 0.25 means it's in the same paragraph. And that goes on and on until these scores, when it's below 0.25, they are pretty weak connections. So the connection between these two isn't actually that strong. So you can kind of, like we do add them, but you can kind of usually ignore those. One useful feature of graph analysis and also of the other algorithms is the freezing option. If we freeze the graph analysis plugin, means that if we navigate to a different node, like for example, go here and then look at this article about Trump and the election, the code citation panel will not change, and we can actually keep researching. So for example, we can go here and read a bit about this, and we might wonder, it's pretty tangential, but what is the relation with China? And we go look for where's China, over here, and then here there's something about China and the relation with Joe Biden, etc. And so this is a really nice way to research in the person that you had in your vault. So I can immediately see all these different entities that Joe Biden was involved with. And you can also see it pairs very nicely with the Supercharged Links plugin, because if we go to the Joe Biden node, you see all these different entities, and it immediately showed what kind of entity it is. So if I want to know about places that Joe Biden is related to, I can just look at these green pins, or with persons by looking at the emojis. So Supercharged Links is really something that will really help you filter through these kinds of lists. And let's go to the next example. This is like a publicly available vault that we found to test our methods on. So right now we are in the human node, and we can see to what kinds of concepts is human most related. And we see large one is the connection between humans and their brain. So here's a nice fact, right? I've not read this vault, so I'm not sure what exactly is in there, but you can see that the human brain is built up from the bottom up, which is apparently a concept called ontogenesis. Similarly, we can figure out that there is a decusation of the human brain. I don't know what this word means, to be honest. I don't know what this word means either. But we know now that there is this relation between the human brain and these three concepts. So just using the code citations plugin, we can already find these really interesting concepts. And this works for many things. For example, if we want to know how to achieve happiness, we can see all kinds of things that are related to happiness. The mind is, of course, related to happiness. It looks like they use a lot of footnotes. I'm not so sure exactly to cite it. So it's a bit hard to figure out what exactly they meant there. But you can already see some kind of relations between happiness and personality. This is apparently from a book called The Happiness Hypothesis. And with the brain, of course. I think they mainly seem to have a lot of citations. So there's one book which causes all these code citations. Um, and we're going to look at feeling to see what is important to feeling. And you can already see that all of these kind of concepts seem really related to feelings. So this is already like a nice way to quickly browse through and get a bit of an idea of what their vault looks like and what kind of things they are talking about and how they are related. Now finally, I want to get into my work life. I don't really want to get into work life, but for this demo purposes, we will. And my work I do is I'm a PhD researcher, and I do machine learning and statistics and all kinds of things. So I'm looking right now at a concept, a statistical concept called bias, and bias is very related to the concept of variance, and in particular, the bias-variance trade-off is one of the main statistical concepts when you want to think about estimators and how to estimate a quantity. And often you want to trade off bias and variance. So this is a very good similarity one. So we can see some papers where bias and variance are both discussed. So for example, this is a paper about the bias-variance trade-off in some kind of context. And we can immediately look at that and see some details about what kind of specific context this is in, or learn about how the mean square error is related, or whatever. You can look at all kinds of different papers that discuss the bias-variance trade-off. Or we can see how consistency is related to biasness, which is a concept that is very related to biasness, very similar. And other things that come up, if you look at the co-citations panel, is Jensen's inequality. Inequality that is very useful and famously very biased. So we can already see a lot of concepts right here that are very related to biasness, and you can immediately see context in which these two things are used together. And in fact, this is a really strong list of concepts. For example, this one as well, the straight-through estimator, famously useful but biased estimator, etc. Right? So I hope these examples were a bit enlightening, but I mainly want to get a point across that if you want to get into this plugin, you should just try it, right? Just install it in your vault and see what co-citations look like for some nodes that you have. Now, I'd recommend looking at the bit more popular nodes first. You get a bit of an impression, but can be used for anything really. And yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this demo. Thank you.